Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, Rahayu. Good morning and welcome to the public lecture by Professor Ricardo Hausman with the topics Moving Towards 8% Growth for Indonesia. On behalf of the committee, we would like to extend our warmest welcome to our honorable guest, His Excellency Rahmat Pambudi, Minister of National Development Planning, Head of National Development Planning Agency of the Republic of Indonesia. Professor Ricardo Hausman. Mr. Eka Chandra Buana as Deputy Minister for Macro Planning and Development. Ms. Amalia Adininggar Widyasanti, Senior Advisor to the Minister for Leading Sector and Digital Innovation, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, Indonesia is entering a crucial phase in its development journey with the implementation of the Midterm National Development Plan 2025-2029. One of its most ambitious targets is achieving 8% economic growth, a goal that demands bold strategies, innovative policies, and strong national commitment. To realize this vision, we must carefully formulate the effective economic strategies that can drive sustainable and inclusive growth over the next 5 years. Today, we are honored to hear from Professor Ricardo Hausman, a leading global economist who will share his insight on the challenges Indonesia faces and the strategy approaches we must implement to achieve this ambitious growth target. Ladies and gentlemen, our honorable guests, now we will hear welcoming remarks that will be delivered by Senior Advisor for Minister to the Leading Sector and Digital Innovation, to Ms. Amalia Adininggar Widyasanti. Floor is yours.
His Excellency Minister of National Development Planning, Head of Bappenas, Bapak Profesor Rahmat Pambudi, Professor Ricardo Hausman, Director of Growth Lab, Kennedy School of Government from Harvard University, Executive Secretary to the Minister of National Development Planning, Ibu Teni, and Deputy Minister for Macro Development Planning, Bapak Eka Chandra Buana, and all my Echelon 1 colleagues, Echelon 2 colleagues, all advisors to the Minister of Planning, and ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is a great pleasure for all of us to welcome Professor Ricardo Hausman to our office at the Ministry of National Development Planning. And I would like to thank to the Minister to share your valuable time to attend this event, Bapak Menteri. And it is a great honor to have Professor Ricardo Hausman here, and do appreciate that Professor Hausman can make a time to drop by in our office in the mid of your very short visit in Jakarta, a 3-day visit here in Jakarta between your busy schedule. Professor Hausman arrived in Jakarta on Saturday night, flying from Spain, and tomorrow he will deliver a speech at the Indonesia Economic Summit organized by Indonesia Business Council, and then he will leave Jakarta for Cambodia the day after tomorrow, early in the morning. Professor Hausman is the founder and director of the Growth Lab at Harvard University. He has delivered many growth projects in many countries, such as Spain, Cambodia, Saudi Arabia, Colombia, Venezuela, and many more. For example, in Saudi Arabia, Professor Hausman advised on the Saudi Arabia Vision 2030, helping the country diversify its economy away from oil dependency. Professor Hausman is widely recognized as the developer of growth diagnostics framework with Dani Rodrik and Andres Velasco. Professor Hausman is the mind maker behind the Atlas of Economic Complexity and Product Spaces, which is a groundbreaking tool that maps the productive capabilities of countries and their potential for economic diversification and growth. The Atlas uses network analysis to visualize how countries can transition to more complex and higher value economic activities. I always remember Professor Hausman do emphasize that growth policies need to be focused on identifying new diversification opportunities and having an active government role to solve the coordination failures. The government role is not about substituting for the market. This is what he said. But he said that the government role is to solve the market failures associated with the chicken and egg dilemma in the economy. Apart from this, we would like to thank to ASEAN Development Bank Jakarta, who has provided support to this event, and also special thanks to Pak Chandra, Deputy Minister for Macro Development Planning, for your cooperation, and also to my colleagues as well as my team for your support to make this event happen. By having this rare and unique opportunity to hear directly from Professor Hausman in person, we do hope that it will not only enlighten us, but also spark meaningful discussions and new ideas of growth recipes for the economy of Indonesia. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ladies and gentlemen, next, we will hear an overview of Indonesia Growth Target delivered by Minister of National Development Planning, Head of National Development Planning Agency of the Republic of Indonesia. Without further ado, to His Excellency Rahmat Pambudi, floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. Your Excellency, Professor Ricardo Hausman. On behalf of the Ministry of National Development Planning, I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to Professor Ricardo Hausman for taking the time to share his expertise with us today's public lecture on moving toward 8% growth for Indonesia. It is an honor for me, for all of us, to have you here. Professor Hausman, as just said, Ibu Winnie, a renowned expert in economic complexity, his contribution to economic growth and development, particularly in introducing the growth diagnostic framework that identify the most binding constraint to countries' economic growth. In 2017, Bappenas hosted Professor Hausman in public lecture on growth diagnostic, a new approach to national development strategies, identifying the binding constraint to growth in Indonesia, and also conduct a growth diagnostic study to identify the most binding constraint to economic Indonesian growth. The study revealed that the most binding constraint is still same, regulatory and institution, contributing the stagnation to growth recent years. The findings were instrumental shaping our national medium-term development plan 2020-2024, where adopted growth diagnostic as a part of our development strategies. Now we are embarking a new journey with the new 2025-2029 for next 5 years. One of our most ambitious targets in this plan is to achieve a sustainable and inclusive high economic growth of 8%. This goal essentially for Indonesian as a reduce poverty, improve human capital, ensure Indonesian long-term economic resilience, and also to achieve this, we have developed an 8+1 strategy framework for economic growth acceleration. However, we recognize that global geoeconomic uncertainty will pose significant challenge in achieving this target. Rising inflation, supply chain disruption, and inward-looking economic policy in major economies like the United States are adding further complexity to our growth trajectory. This challenge makes it even more critical for us to adopt innovative, adaptive, and data-driven policy to maintain Indonesia's growth momentum. Given these circumstances, we are eager to hear your insight, perspective, Professor Hasman, how Indonesia can accelerate economic growth toward 8% despite these complex global challenges. We believe your expertise will provide us with valuable guidance in navigating these challenges. As you said before in our room, each country has its unique opportunities, and Indonesia to shape its own unique opportunities. And we want to learn from this from your side. In one recent paper, Professor Hausman mentioned countries evolve their comparative advantage. For example, Israel used export oranges. Now it export IPOs in high-term form. Turkey used the export of olive oil, but now export car, export electronic, export many products, not only agriculture product. They open for many production that can compete to other countries. How should Indonesia evolve? Now we are looking forward to productive and enlightening discussion from Professor Hasman to put forward Indonesia economic growth faster, better, and also we are facing more complex. That's why we need your lecture now. Again, Professor Hasman, I'll stop here. Let them listen your lecture, and better I'm not here so that they can discuss with you freely and openly. Again, thank you very much for your coming.
Terima kasih Pak Menteri, mohon untuk tetap berada di atas panggung Bapak. Kita akan foto bersama sebentar. And we would like to invite Professor Hausman, Deputy Minister for Macro Planning and Development, Senior Advisor to the Minister for Leading Sector and Digital Innovation, to join the photo session. In 1, 2, 3. Once again, 1, 2, 3. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give a big round of applause. Thank you so much, Bapak dan Ibu. Kami silahkan untuk dapat kembali ke tempat semula. To Professor Ricardo Hausman, please stay on the stage. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu, kami silahkan untuk dapat kembali ke tempat semula. Now we will hear lecture on moving towards 8% growth for Indonesia, how to make it happen, will be delivered by Professor Ricardo Hausman.
Mr. Minister, Ibu Winnie, high officials, it's really an honor and a pleasure to be back here in Bappenas after what's now 8 years. Time flies when you're having fun. So I'm super happy to be back, and I really find it exciting that the country is targeting 8% growth. I like the idea that if you don't achieve it, you'll fall within the stars, as the President said. It's a very promising idea. I cannot pretend to tell you how to achieve that. It would be, presumptuous of me to assume that I can know about that. But what I can say is a little bit how can I see Indonesia using the tools and methods that I have been working on with my collaborators and others. So I'm going to tell you a little bit how I think about growth, and then I'm going to make comments on Indonesia as as I go along. And it will shed some light as to where I see growth opportunities going forward. Can I have the control? No? Wait, okay, so can you pass the next one? Okay, so what I have here in this graph is the evolution of GDP per capita in Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam relative to the US. Okay, so say the US, think of it as the technological frontier, and you know what's been happening to GDP per capita, and you see that in the case of Indonesia, it went from something like 14% of the US GDP per capita at purchasing power parity to something like 18%. So it's been narrowing the gap, but it has been narrowing the gap not that quickly. So the idea of 8% growth is that you want to narrow the gap faster so that you can achieve a high income status by 2050. Okay, so in essence, you're asking the question, you know, how can we become a rich country? And how can we transform our reality? Next. So that's in some sense the question that got Adam Smith interested in economics. He asked himself the question, why are some countries rich and other countries poor? Now, when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, the richest country in the world was the Netherlands. And it was about 4 times richer than the poorest country in the world. Okay, so there was a gap of 4 to 1, and that's what had him interested in this question. Now, if you look in the world today, the poorest country in the world is not working. All right. The poorest country in the world is Burundi. If I multiply by 4 the income per capita of Burundi, which was the difference between the poorest countries and the Netherlands, I get to Madagascar. So that was the gap by then. If I multiply by 4 the income per capita, I get to Cambodia. If I multiply by 4 the income per capita, I get to Indonesia. If I multiply by 4 the income per capita, I get to New Zealand. For some reason, this is not changing. I don't know why. So a problem that was a problem of 4 to 1 has become a problem of 256 to 1. So if Adam Smith found 4 to 1 to be an interesting problem, we should find 256 to 1 to be a really interesting problem. Okay? Now, the question is, what's behind this? And what's behind this is that if you look at income per capita since the year 0, no, 2,000 years ago, incomes per capita were relatively flat until they started to accelerate some 200 years ago. If we zoom into this last 200 years, we see that growth happened in some parts of the world that didn't happen in other parts of the world. So if you looked at income per capita differences here, they were small, but now they're huge. Okay? So that means that in today's world, you can take this picture, and you can also take this picture. And you wonder, why is it possible to take this picture and this picture in the world today? Because if I ask you, go take a picture of a typewriter, where would you go take a picture of a typewriter? There are no typewriters anymore. You have to go to a museum or something, right? So how come we can take this picture? Why has this technology not displaced this technology, given that, you know, presumably it's more productive, it's better, and so on. So this begs the question of what is really behind technology. I would say technology is the explanation for why there are rich countries and poor countries, rich countries make different things and they make it in different ways. Poor countries make fewer things, simpler things, and they make it with a different technology. So really at the core of these differences in income are differences in technology. Now the question is, what is technology? And how do you want to think about technology? What is technology? I would put it to you that technology is the knowledge we use to transform the world from the way it is to the way we want it to be. You know, the way the world is, you know, it's a fine meadow, valley, whatever, but you don't want a fine valley, you want a hamburger. And to transform a valley into a hamburger, you have to transform the world. And to transform the world, you have to know how to transform the world. You have to, you know, domesticate animals like cows to make the meat, and maybe make the milk with which to make the cheese. But you also need to make wheat to make the bread, and you have to make tomatoes, and so you have to transform a lot of things in the world. The knowledge we use to transform the world is what we call technology. But this knowledge is going to take three forms. It's going to exist in the world in three ways. It'll take the form of tools and materials. In this form, the knowledge on how to make the tool is already in the tool, is embodied in the tool. You don't need to know how to make the tool to use the tool. The knowledge on how to make the tool is already embodied in the tool. So you don't need to know. You can just use it, right? Technology also takes the form of codes, recipes, formulas, algorithms, how-to-do manuals. In this way, technology exists in some symbolic space, right? Here it is ink over paper, but it's not in the ink and it's not in the paper. And actually, this is not ink over paper, this is a picture of ink over paper, and it doesn't change its meaning because it exists in some symbolic space, okay? We call that codes or codified knowledge, right? Now, if this is all there was, we would put the tools in a container and we would ship them around. And we would put the codes on the web and we would share them. And in that way, the world would be flat technologically. Everybody would have access to the same technology. But really, this knowledge in the world takes three forms, and I've only told you two: codes and tools. The third thing that technology, the third form that the knowledge of how to change the world takes, you can answer by asking the following question: what do you do when your tooth hurts? What do you do? Well, you can ask your significant other to download an article from the web and follow the instructions. I hope you don't do that, right? You go to an expert, right? You go to a dentist, and the dentist uses tools, the dentist follows protocols, but the dentist mixes the tools and the protocols with something you and I don't have, which is the ability to look into the mouth and see things we wouldn't see, and the ability to use the tools in ways we wouldn't know how to use. That third thing is what we call know-how or tacit knowledge. It exists in brains and only in brains, nowhere else. Now, that know-how does not necessarily involve understanding. It's not kind of like information. Here is this Rafa Nadal playing tennis. He knows how to play tennis. But if you have a conversation with this gentleman, I can assure you that your tennis game will not improve. So it's not information that way, right? It's a wiring of the brain that takes a long time to happen. Malcolm Gladwell likes to say that it takes 10,000 hours to become good at something. 10,000 hours at 40 hours a week is like 5 years. So it takes a long time to become good at something. And we don't have 5-year chunks of our life to become good at many things. So So we put different bits of knowledge in different heads in order to have knowledge grow. So you can say that this lady knows how to implement that technology, right? But that would not be correct. In order to implement that technology, you need all these other people. Because most of the technology does not depend on one person knowing, but on teams of complementary people knowing what to do to implement the technology. So I'm going to argue that what's really key in the process of growth is not tools, it's not codes, it's know-how. And it is collective know-how. Now, I'm going to have to go out and measure it and say this has more, this has less. So to do that, I'm going to first start by explaining a little bit how we go about in doing it. Here is an Inuit from northern Canada. Here's the Inuit from northern Canada engaged in food production. And here is the Inuit from northern Canada engaged in housing construction. And here's the Inuit engaged in the transportation industry. And I want to know who has more know-how, the Inuit or modern man? Who has more know-how? Well, I don't know. This guy uses glasses, he uses headphones, he uses a shirt, he uses a screen, he uses a computer, he uses software. He does not know how to make any of that. If you put this gentleman here, I can assure you that he will die. You don't know if he will freeze to death or if he will starve to death, but he will not survive. So it doesn't make any sense to say that this man has more know-how than this guy's. But what you can say is that the society to which this guy belongs knows how to make more things than the society to which these guys belong. Because the society to which this guy belongs knows how to make headphones, computers, screens, software, shirts, glasses. He doesn't. Somebody does, or the collective does. He does not have that knowledge. Okay? The society to which these guys belong, everybody knows how to hunt, everybody knows how to fish, everybody knows how to make an igloo, everybody knows how to run a dog sled. So everybody has in their head sort of like a copy of all of the technology. So I will put it to you that the difference is not in the individual. Societies know more, not so much because individuals know more, but because individuals know different. The whole can know more if people know different. That's a little bit what Adam Smith thought about the division of labor. It's really the division of knowledge. If you put different bits of knowledge in different heads, the whole can know more than its parts. Okay? So I'm going to say that development is something that happens at that level. It's not something that is happening necessarily at the individual level. It's happening at the collective level through the division of knowledge in different heads, and so on. So now if you put different bits of knowledge in different heads, how do you use knowledge? Well, it depends on what it is that you're going to do. There are some things that can be done by a single person. Okay, so if it's going to, if I like to measure how much knowledge fits in a head, I don't know how much it is. If it's a gigabyte, a terabyte, you know, a megabyte, I'm going to call it a person byte. Okay? So if you're going to do something that requires one person byte, it can be done by one person. But if it requires more than one person byte, it cannot be done by a person. Okay? So if it requires more knowledge than fits in a person, you'll require teams of people, and that's what we call firms. And because that's not enough, it will require to put these firms on a value chain. So we are adding all the knowledge going into the inputs and etc. So the process of the economy is this process of aggregating this knowledge that is dispersed in society. So, for example, these people here, a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker, these can all be family businesses, right? Maybe the knowledge necessary to make these things can reside in a family. This can be a family business. No family knows how to make these products. And you could say that no country is able to make this product. This is the Boeing 787. It's made across all of those countries, across all of those companies, because the knowledge necessary to make the turbines is very different from the knowledge necessary to make the landing gear, or the knowledge necessary to make the windows, or the toilets, or the carpet, or the avionics, etc., etc. So you need a lot of distributed knowledge that you have to bring together to make the product. Okay? This does not mean that companies have to be big. So this is a big company. This is kind of like economies of scale. In this company, if you move people around, you put one person, say, this person, you send them over there, and that person, you send them over there, and this person you bring here, nothing much will happen. If you try to do the same thing in this company, you will hear the difference. Because different people are bringing different bits of expertise, different bits of knowledge to the game. So it's not about economies of scale, it's about aggregation of knowledge. Okay. So I try to capture this logic with what we like to call the Scrabble theory of economic development. These units of knowledge that you put in different heads, they are like letters. And when you want to make things, you have to bring these letters together to make words. So the metaphor I like to use is that these units of knowledge, of know-how, are like these letters, and you bring them together to make products, and products are words. Okay? So that's the metaphor. Now let's play with the metaphor. If you only have one letter, there aren't too many words you can make. You can make one word. If I give you these 3 letters, now you can make 4 words, and you can make 3-letter words. If I just give you 1 extra letter, now you can make 9 words, and you can make 4-letter words. If I give you these 10 letters, I didn't count it, but the Scrabble website says that you can make 595 words, and words that are up to 10 letters long. Okay? So the more letters you have, the more words you can put together. We're going to call that you're more diversified. And the longer the words you can make. So you can make products that are more complex, harder to make, require more letters. Okay? So now that I put you this picture, let's see this picture again. And ask yourself, who has more know-how? Who has more know-how, the guy on the left or the guy on the right? And I would put it to you that this is very similar to the example I gave you of the Inuit and modern man. The guy on the left, he knows how to take care of his own bulls. He knows how to make his own fertilizer with dung. He knows how to make his own tools, right? He decides when to plant. So he has a lot of know-how. The guy on the right, he knows how to drive this combine, this harvester. He doesn't know how to make the harvester. Making the harvester is like making an airplane, right? He doesn't know how to make the gasoline that the harvester uses. He doesn't know how to make the genetically modified seeds that he's probably using. He doesn't know how to make the fertilizer. He doesn't know how to make the agrochemicals. If the machine breaks down, he knows the phone number of whom to call. So there is no way you can say that the guy on the right has more know-how than the guy on the left. But the guy on the right is a letter in a very long word. In his network, there are people who know how to make combines, who know how to make genetically modified seeds, fertilizers, etc. He's part of that network. So the productivity is in the network, not in the individual. It's because he's part of that network that he's productive. Okay? So I'm going to think of the world as being composed of three kinds of things. One thing is these capabilities, these letters. Okay? A second thing the world is made out of is places. And I'm going to think of places, whether I think of a place as Indonesia, or if I think of the place as Sumatra, or Papua. It's a place. A place is characterized by the letters that it has. And then there are products. And products are characterized by the letters that they need. So that's my description of the world. Now, given this description of the world, I can ask the question, who is going to make what? Well, the countries are going to make the words for which they have all the necessary letters. So notice what happens here. The country at the top has a lot of letters. The country at the bottom has few letters. It only has 3. The product at the top is a very long word. The product at the bottom is a very short word. Right? So let's look at what happens. The country or the place that has a lot of letters is able to make all 5 products. So it's very diversified. It makes 5 things. The place at the bottom only has enough letters to make 1 product. So places that have more letters will be able to make more words. Notice the hat at the bottom. It's a short word. You only need 3 letters to make it. All 3 places make that word. So short words are easy to make. Everybody makes them. Longer words like pharmaceuticals, it's only made by 1 country. So long words are made by few places. We call that they have low ubiquity. The ubiquity is the number of places that make a product. So more complicated products are made in fewer places. Simpler products are made in many places. Okay? So countries that have more letters will have 2 characteristics. They're going to make more products, they'll be more diversified, but they will also make products that are less ubiquitous, products that are made in fewer places. Well, when we look at the world, that's exactly what we find. This is on the x-axis is how many products do you make, and on the y-axis is how many countries make the products that you make. You see, the rich countries are at the bottom right. They make many things and things that are done in few places. Poor countries are at the top left. They make few things and things that are done everywhere. And you see Indonesia is the red one. It's kind of like an intermediate place. It makes a certain number of products, say not unlike Japan, but the product that Japan makes are much longer words. They're made in fewer places than the products that Indonesia makes. This allows us to estimate how many letters a country has. And the number of letters a country has is what we like to call the index of economic complexity. Okay? And that's the index of economic complexity. Blue means that is high complexity. Red means low complexity. So this says that Indonesia has more letters than Papua New Guinea, right? It says that Thailand has more letters than Indonesia. It says that China has more letters than Thailand, right? It says that Saudi Arabia has more letters than, say, Libya, that Germany has a lot of letters, more than Spain, and so on. So we have an index of economic complexity, and we can ask ourselves, does the index of economic complexity, which is kind of how many letters you have, how much knowledge do you have, or how much knowledge do you use in production, does it relate to GDP per capita? And you see that the relation is quite good. Now you might say it's a pretty good relation, but it's not perfect. Okay? Now the question is the gap between what the theory says and where you see the world, is it a defect of the theory or is it a problem with the world? For example, here it would say India. India, what are you doing down there? Why aren't you richer, given how many letters you have? Well, India has been growing very quickly. Maybe that's the reason why. They already have the letters to be richer than you are. And you have a country, say, like Greece. It says, Greece, how did you get to be so rich given how little you know? Well, maybe that's the reason why Greece hasn't been doing very well. So actually, we think that these gaps are informative about your capacity to grow. It asks whether you have more than enough letters to be richer than you are or not. Unfortunately, Indonesia is on the good side of this thing, so you already have what it takes to be richer than you are. So that's first important message, okay? Now it's interesting, what I have here is all the countries in the world that started being poorer than the US in 1990, and I asked how fast did they grow in the subsequent 30 years. And I've divided it by quintiles, the fastest growing to the slowest growing, okay? And then on the right hand, I ask what happened to their economic complexity. So you see that essentially the yellow group caught up with the US. The green group, the second one, more or less caught up a little bit, but more slowly. And then the others didn't really catch up. They stayed where they were or they fell back. On the right, you have what happened to their economic complexity. And you see that the yellow group increased its economic complexity a lot. The green group came in second, and the others lost complexity. So the argument is that what drives long-term growth is this growth in complexity. Okay? Now, if I look at the complexity of Indonesia, it has been somewhat stagnant. Okay? You were started at 79, you moved to 61 in terms of ranking, and now you're down to 73. In the same period, Vietnam started at 116 and ended up at 53. Okay? So your complexity justifies a higher level of income, but your complexity has not been growing. Okay? That's a second message. Okay? Okay, so now I've told you a little bit about complexity and so on and the letters. Now I want to ask myself, how can I make the letters grow? Okay? And to make the letters grow, I typically need to solve chicken and egg problems. Okay, so the minister already mentioned chicken and egg, and Ibu Winnie talked about chicken and eggs in their initial remarks. This chicken and egg problem, I know that, don't criticize me, I know this is a rooster and not a chicken, but you know, you'll forgive me. It's a little bit this classification problem. I'm going to say that in this picture there are two animals that are close to each other and one animal that is different. And I ask you which is which animal is different and which two animals are similar. Some people say, well, the lion and the zebra are from Africa, so they are similar, they're from Africa. Others say that the zebra eats grass and neither the bear nor the lion eat grass, they eat other things. So, but I want you not to apply those theories that you bring to a table, I want you to apply the Scrabble theory. And if you apply the Scrabble's theory, a zebra is just a bear with an extra Z. You see? B-E-A-R, and you put a Z, you get zebra. So if you start from bear and you want to go to zebra, you just need one letter. If you start from bear and you want to go to lion, you start with 4 letters you don't need, and you need 4 letters you don't have. So in Scrabble world, bear to lion is far away, bear to zebra is close, okay? You got that intuition? Okay. Now I want to apply that intuition to all of the products. And I want to say if 2 products use more or less the same letters, they're going to be close to each other. If they use very different letters, they're going to be away. So the metaphor I want you to have in your head now is that technology space, the space of all possible products, is like a forest, where every product is like a tree in the forest. And 2 products are close to each other in the forest if they have similar letters. So bear to lion, bear to zebra is going to be like here, and bear to lion is going to be like that, okay? So I need to represent that space of possibilities. And that's what we call, this forest is what we call the product space. And this is a representation of that space. Think of it as the forest, okay? So at the bottom right, in green, you have apparel. Here you have textile products. Here you have electronics. Here you have machinery. Up there you have oil. Here you have chemicals. There you have agricultural products, okay? That's the space of technology, if you want, the space of possibility. That's the product space, okay? Products are going to differ in how complex they are. Some products are more complex than others. They're also going to differ in how dense is the forest in that part of the product space. So for example, you see that there in apparel, products are very close to each other. In textiles, they're close to each other. In machinery, they're close to each other. But you know, other parts of the product space, the trees are farther apart. They're less connected. So, say machinery, if you know how to make one kind of machine, it's very easy to move to other kinds of machine. If you know how to make one kind of apparel, it's easy to make other kinds of apparel. So garments and machinery are equally, say, connected, but machinery is more complex than garments, okay? So these are different ways to understand how different industries differ, okay? Okay. So now that I have the product space, I can think of what is a country. A country is a collection of teams that know how to make certain products. So think of them as a country is a collection of monkeys that populate some trees in the forest. Okay? And I can look at what is a country good at, say, what does it export? And say, okay, where in this space does it have monkeys? Does it have firms able to produce? So I start with my own country. This is Venezuela. So you see most of it is all empty, and it has a big gorilla there in the oil sector up there, and very little else, right? So then let me show you Mexico. So you see, compare Venezuela to Mexico. Mexico has much more productive capabilities, right? It's in many other parts of the product space. Now you might say that that's because Mexico has 130 million people. No, it's a bigger country. But it's not because of that, because if I look at the smaller countries, say like Austria, okay, let's look at Austria. Austria has even more monkeys than Mexico. They only have 8 million people, but they're even more diversified, okay? So let's look at Indonesia. So this is where Indonesia is in the product space. It has oil there at the top and other minerals, coal. It has apparel over there, and so it's more than some electronics here, some machinery over there, not too much, some chemicals. So it's less diversified than Mexico, more diversified than Venezuela, okay, much less diversified than Austria, okay. So this is the export basket of Indonesia. So it has a lot of minerals in brown, a lot of agricultural products in yellow, and a little bit of electronics there in light blue, and the chemicals up there and so on. So that's the export basket. And this is the export basket of Indonesia colored by complexity. So brown means less complex, green means more complex. So now you know what's the combination of things that Indonesia is making. So many low complexity products, very few higher complexity products. Now, fortunately, Indonesia is in a happy part of the product space. It has more than enough letters to be richer than it is, but it has sufficient monkeys spread around the product space so that its monkeys are close to empty trees. It's close to diversification opportunities, okay? It's well positioned in the product space, and that's what we observe here. The y-axis is how well positioned you are in the product space, and the x-axis is do you have enough letters to be richer than you are already. So here is you have already the letters to be richer than you are, and it's easy for you to get more letters by just jumping to nearby trees. So that's the third message I have, that you are in good position to grow fast. Okay? Now, you're in a good position to grow fast through diversification, but you have not been diversifying very fast. Okay? So it's easy for you to diversify, but you haven't been diversifying. So here is you in 1995, you in 2022. It hasn't increased much. Okay? These are the new products that were added to your export basket since 2007. They represent 6% of your export basket, and they represent only $66 per capita in new exports, compared to, say, $373 per capita in new exports in Cambodia. So now, so you have it easy to diversify, but you have not been exploiting that lever of growth. It's kind of like a fourth message. Okay? Now, using our tools, we like to figure out what's near, which trees, which products are near your monkeys, near your current capabilities, which ones are bear to zebra, and of those, which ones are more attractive. So this is a measure of feasibility, and this is a measure of attractiveness. Okay? And these are the products that are, if you want, provide the best combination of feasibility and attractiveness that we highlight there. And the Atlas of Economic Complexity gives you 50 products to look at, and you can rank them either by how close they are, how feasible they are, how attractive they are, how big is the global market in those products, and how dynamic is the global market in those products. And that is how we like to think about diversification strategies. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about how I think about growth strategies in this context. First, I think that if you want to go to 8% growth, diversification has to play a bigger part than it has played in the past. That's an important message, I think. But the second important message is that your diversification opportunities are not necessarily where you're looking at. You're looking at many of your diversification opportunities by saying, I have some raw materials like palm oil or like nickel. I want to add value to my raw materials. Most of the products that we identify as attractive diversification opportunities are not there. You have many other opportunities elsewhere. Okay? And I would like to say that this idea of adding value to raw materials is often a very narrow way of thinking about all your possibilities. It limits you into fewer possibilities than you actually have. Let me elaborate. Adding value to raw materials or adding value to things is what all production is about. All production is about you start with some things, you do something to it, and you end up with something that is worth more. That's what adding value means, right? So adding value to raw materials is what all production is about. But in your strategy, you're not focusing on adding value to raw materials. You're focusing on adding value to your raw materials. So suddenly, you're restricting yourself to only add value to the raw materials that you happen to have. So for example, if I asked you, look at this product. What is the raw material that is important in this product? Well, I don't know, hundreds. This has the glass, this has the aluminum case, this has lithium, iron, phosphate batteries, this has semiconductors, this has a bunch of things. No one got to make this product by starting from adding value to raw materials. They import a lot of stuff. While looking only at the things for which you have the raw material, you're looking very narrowly at your set of possibilities. Okay? Adding value to raw materials will only uncover very few possibilities. It only gives you advantage from the fact that the raw material is here and you don't have to bring it in. So it saves you in transportation costs. But it narrows the set of things you're looking at. China, Vietnam, they're not adding value to their raw materials. They're importing a lot of stuff and doing things to it. They're not limited by the raw material base. So it's not that you shouldn't add value to your raw materials, it's that there are many other things you should be looking at that you may not be looking at because you're too focused on raw materials. Now let me give you a different way to think about adding value to stuff. Take the case of Finland. Finland is a country that it's very big. It has many, many trees and relatively few people. So you would say it has a lot of wood. So export wood. But, you know, development economists would come and say, no, don't export wood. Add value to your raw materials, right? Export, help me there, furniture. Export paper, right? And Finland exports furniture and paper. But the way Finland got rich was not by exporting just furniture and paper. They were cutting wood and cutting wood and cutting wood. They eventually became good at machines that cut wood. So they moved to machines that cut wood. From machines that cut wood, they moved to machines that cut. Because not everything in the world is made out of wood. So they jumped to the next extreme, machines that cut. Then they moved to automated machines that cut. Because cutting everything by hand can be imprecise or boring, right? So automated machines that cut. From automated machines that cut, they moved to automated machines. Because not everything in the world is about cutting. Maybe you can do other things with automated machines. And from automated machines, they ended up in Nokia. So they went from wood to Nokia, not by adding value to the raw materials, but by adding capabilities to their capabilities. Because they had wood, they had reason to accumulate a set of capabilities. But once they had those capabilities, they could move to other things that did not involve wood anymore. That is no longer about adding value to wood. It's about things that they can do with the capabilities that they had. They moved from cutting wood to cutting other things, right? And from automating and so on. Interestingly, they could not go from cell phones to smartphones. That was like too difficult and they lost to Apple, okay? And Samsung. So add capabilities to your capabilities more than add value to your raw materials. I think it's an important message. I think that there is a role for something you might want to call industrial policy in solving these chicken and egg problems. So I think the government, as Ibu Winnie mentioned, The government is important in facilitating this transformation process, this diversification process. But the fact that you have not been diversifying very quickly suggests that the kind of industrial policy you have been doing may not be delivering the goods. So maybe you want to rethink how you do industrial policy. I think that there's a certain role for innovation policy. I look at your university system, and in Indonesia, from the cohort that is of university age, the percentage that go to university is about half the percentage that goes to university in the US. So you are about halfway to get to US levels of university education. Some parts of Latin America are at 100% or 105% of US levels. So I think you have room to grow in terms of expanding university education. But you're at 50% US enrollment rates. If I look at patenting rates, patents, you're at 1%. So you're at 50% education, 1% patenting. So there's a bigger, much bigger gap. There might be room for you to do breakthroughs in agricultural technology. That's not happening. In mining technology, it's not happening. So there's a big room for potential innovation as accelerating growth. I think you might want to revisit state-owned enterprises. State-owned enterprises were developed back when? I think it would be useful for you to ask yourself if the reasons why you wanted to have those state-owned enterprises when they were founded are still reasons for you to own them now. I'm very interested in the way, for example, Temasek in Singapore, or even Kazina in Malaysia, have been rotating their portfolio of state-owned enterprises. The abandoned ones got into others, etc. So I wonder if the suite, if your set of state-owned enterprises is the one you need, or should you be divesting from some in order to be investing in other things? That's another thing. And then there is this possibility of green growth. Let me tell you about how we think about green growth. Everybody's talking about climate change, the energy transition, and so on. But they've been trying to do it by asking every country to focus on what it is, how it is that they're emitting CO2, and to focus on lowering CO2. Now, you have a lot of coal, you use coal to make your electricity, so you emit a lot of CO2. And so, you have the Just Energy Transition Program and so on that you have signed. It's focused on what are you going to do to lower your emissions. We say that's a very narrow way of looking at the problem. A different way of looking at the problem is to ask, for the world to lower its emissions, for every country to be able to lower its emissions, countries are going to need a lot of things that they need to buy to be able to lower their emissions. Why don't you produce those things that a decarbonizing world will need? Because if you're able to produce the things that a decarbonizing world will need, the more they decarbonize, the more you sell, the more you grow. So in our mind, green growth is about redirecting production towards the things that a decarbonizing world will demand. So the question is not what you can do to lower Indonesia's emissions. The question is, what can Indonesia do to lower global emissions by supplying the enablers of global decarbonization? Okay? So we've been looking at some of the value chains that are involved in global decarbonization, from electric vehicles to heat pumps to green hydrogen to wind power, etc. These are all the value chains. Every circle there is one of the inputs in the value chain of these things. And you see, for example, how we decomposed each value chain, what goes into every product, and this is for electrolyzers and so on. So that's the value chain. And these value chains for these different technologies are not standalone. They use similar inputs. Some of them use similar inputs to others. So what we've done is we've taken this product space that you already saw, and we use it to identify in the product space which are inputs to green products. And here I have the product space colored by where are these green products, okay? And for example, if I look at critical minerals, I can look at where among critical minerals is Indonesia. And you see, these are the things in which Indonesia is already providing inputs to these critical minerals. These are some of the products that we find interesting for you to explore. Okay, so we can identify other products that would be part of the things you want to look into diversification in a world that wants to decarbonize. There are plenty of other opportunities we have yet to look at. For example, we want to look at biomass. You are one of the few places on Earth where biomass grows 12 months of the year. So if you're going to process biomass through some kind of technology, here it would be more efficient because you can provide the biomass year-round. If you do it in the US, you can only provide the biomass in September and stop counting, right? So there are plenty of other things where we think that you could be playing an interesting role, but you have to be exploring those opportunities. So in sum, there are elements you already have that are poising you for fast growth. There are opportunities that you have that can accelerate the growth, but you have not been enabling yourself of those opportunities yet. And in the strategies that you're following, you're leaving a lot of opportunities untouched. But we think that there are many opportunities there. So I'm very optimistic about the future of Indonesia. I think there are many opportunities there, but maybe we need to fix a little bit the strategy so that we can seize those opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Aswan, for the insightful presentation. We kindly request to remain on stage and please take a seat on the chairs we have provided. Now we will proceed with the discussion session. This is an opportunity for our distinguished guests to engage with Professor Aswan and ask questions related to today's topic. Kami silakan Bapak Ibu bagi yang ingin bertanya, kami silakan untuk dapat mengangkat tangannya dan menyampaikan pesannya, juga sertakan namanya tentunya dalam bahasa Inggris. Kami silakan. Kami silakan kepada teman-teman ataupun Bapak Ibu yang ingin melakukan pertanyaan, silakan Ibu Vivi.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Vivi. I'm a Deputy Economy and Digital Transformations. It's really a pleasure to have your insight. It's really insightful as well as interesting. I have two more questions for the fact of Indonesia. First, that the SMEs in Indonesia is very high. It includes also the startups that's already play with high technology as well as innovations, but somehow they still prefer to stay in the SMEs level. The other is about the other fact is about the decentralizations. So if we play the Scrabble, somehow we know about the letters, but seems that they want to have a playing field by their own. So didn't share a letter. So I don't know if you have other countries' experience who deal with, you mentioned about the India, who have quite high SMEs and decentralizations. Thank you.
So, no, excellent question. Thank you very much for your comment and your question. First of all, it's a very, very typical thing in most developing countries that you have many, many very small firms and few very large firms. And there are different reasons for it, and I'll give you a few. One of them is we've all been developing banking systems. Banking systems allow you to give loans to companies. Loans are debt. And in order for a company to be able to absorb debt, it needs to have equity. No, banks like to look at the leverage ratio, at what is the debt to equity ratio. But there are no sources of equity beyond friends and family. So firms end up not being able to borrow more from banks because they don't have enough equity. So they can only grow through retained earnings. And that limits their ability to grow, okay? So I think that one idea is that we need to look more into how to inject equity into firms. Now, once the firm grows, it typically is able to make some technology investments that cannot be done at the small scale. For example, if you're a small firm and you want to invest in a website, well, the cost of a website doesn't really depend too much on the size of the firm. So if you're a big firm, doing a website looks cheap. If you're a small firm, doing the same website looks expensive because you're much smaller. You have to amortize it over a much smaller. So I think that if there was more equity in the system, companies, some companies would buy other small companies, increase their scale. With a bigger scale, they would be able to invest in more technology and justify the larger size. So that's a second element of why you're trapped in this low, in this equilibrium with many small firms that do not have the scale to invest in technology. Third one is that big firms, they can diversify their talent. For example, a big firm will have people who know about accounting, who know about finance, who know about human resource management, who know about procurement, who know about production, who know about branding, who know about marketing, who know about contracts, who know about taxes, right? And it's not the same person that knows about these things. There's an accounting department, a finance department, and so on. So to do that, they need to hire many people, diverse people. And to hire diverse people, they like to locate themselves centrally in the city. So they are in the central business district. But then it will make possible for some people to go to work at the central business district. The poorer people will have to live farther away. And they'll have to be spending more time going to work. And it will be expensive to go to work. So we find that the large companies tend to be centrally located. The smaller companies are more dispersed. And part of the reason is that it's too expensive to locate yourself in the central business district, both for the firms and for the workers. So many of what we call the informal sector of, self-employed and so on, they do not go to the central business district because it's too far away, it's too expensive to go there. You would rather take a lower productivity job where you save yourself the commute. So I think that part of the problem of these large set of small firms is inefficient urbanization. Inefficient urbanization. Inefficient transportation mechanisms and so on. That's another angle of the story. A third angle of the story is also that to go from small to medium or bigger than medium, managers have to be more capable. And there may be a bottleneck in capable managers. Say the same person running a small firm may not have the capacity to run a bigger firm because it requires coordinating more diverse people and so on. So some people argue that there might be a bottleneck, not in the general education of the population, but in the level of education of these managers. So that's something about what might be behind these, this long tail in the distribution of firm size. Okay? It would be interesting to do an in-depth analysis of Indonesia to see which margins seem to be the most promising to be acting on. In Latin America, where I have done more in-depth analysis, and even in South Africa, we found that these transportation costs are very important. Urban transportation cost of workers play a very important role. I've seen a little bit, I've had a little bit of experience with traffic in Jakarta, so I can assume that maybe there's a little bit there. Okay. So you mentioned decentralization, or Jakarta is, I mean, Indonesia is a country of, I don't know, 30,000 islands, and so it's highly dispersed. We have been honing the tools to be able to make this analysis at the local level, at the province level, or at the city level. We have a website called Metroverse that you can see, repeat this analysis for the level of the city. I think with proper data, you should be able to do it easily at the level of the province. And then you would have diversification strategies, not for Indonesia as a whole, but for Kalimantan, for Sumatra, for East Java, West Java, etc. No? Based on, what are the letters that are there, what's nearby, etc. So I do believe that effort should be done. Again, thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much for your answer. And kami buka pertanyaan lagi. Kami silahkan bagi Bapak Ibu ataupun teman-teman yang ingin melakukan pertanyaan. Silahkan Bapak.
Thank you, Professor Hausman. You mentioned earlier that Indonesia in a good positions to move fast, but we were not moving fast. And you provide some strategies such as industrial policies, innovations, how state-owned enterprises progress, as well as green growth diversifications. But you also mentioned in one of your slides that economic complexity is a long-term strategy. And how do you think that this strategy will fit to our aspirations as our president wants the 8% be achieved by 2029? So do you think this economic complexity can catch up with the aspiration to grow by 8% by 2029? Thank you.
Yes, I think economic complexity is a metric, if you want, of progress, of long-term progress. It doesn't give you, it's about the what, it's not about the how. For the how, I would ask myself, if a country like Thailand does not have the raw materials that you have, and if a country like Thailand or Vietnam doesn't have the internal market that you have? Why have they been making faster progress? And I would put it to you that the raw materials and the internal market may not have to play such an important role as it has played in Indonesia. You have used your kind of economic leverage. They're saying, I own 50% of the nickel market. If you want it, you'll have to process it here. And if you want the palm oil, you'll have to process it here, and so on. And that's so you're leveraging, you know, your raw materials to accelerate things. And you're saying, I have 280 million people. If you want access to my market, you'll have to do things here. Other countries have been able to attract companies faster without using those tools. So I wonder if by using those tools, you make yourself less attractive and not more attractive. You're using more coercion than incitement. And the net of that may not be as positive. In some sense, you remind me of Brazil. Brazil also has had the idea that they have a large internal market, and they have been making less progress than other countries that don't have that. So maybe I would revisit some of your industrial policies or your strategies in the direction of using less coercion and more incentives.
Sudah jelas Bapak? Baik, terima kasih. Pertanyaan selanjutnya, kami silahkan.
Good morning, Professor. Indonesia is a piece of heaven. We have everything, but we don't export anything. I mean, technology, superior agriculture product. We export all goods, but nothing special. Do you agree or not? And the second, basically Indonesia is an agriculture or agriculture country, and marine or fisheries, but agricultural land is still owned by individual with land area ranging from 1,000 meters to 2 hectares, so that they are not competitive in buying technology for agriculture. Fishery products have not become industrial product. Do you think the government or private companies should buy agricultural land and manage it with modern technology? How many % will the agriculture and fishery sector be able to contribute to economic growth? Thank you, Professor.
No, thank you very much for your question. I don't pretend to know enough about your agricultural and fishery sectors, but I can say the following. If you're going to grow at 8%, it's because you're going to have a process of very rapid urbanization. And if you're going to have a process of very rapid urbanization, you are going to have to develop activities that are urban and not based on agriculture. The rural sector is going to benefit from the fact that there will be fewer people living in rural areas so that they can work with more land per capita, because population in rural areas will be falling. Today in Korea, there is 1/3 of the people that were there in 1960, because the process of urbanization has been so fast that absolute populations in rural areas have declined to 1/3 what they were in absolute terms in 1960. So I can imagine that if you grow at 8%, there will be a reduction of population in rural areas that will allow for increased productivity in rural areas. No? So maybe you'll be able to work with land plots that are a little bit bigger and so on. And your minister is an expert on agriculture, on animal husbandry and so on. So I would ask him how to increase productivity in agriculture. But you're going to need other engines of growth in urban areas. And they cannot be just the processing of agricultural products or the processing of fisheries. It's not enough for the number of people you will be having in urban areas. You have to explore many, many other value chains in other areas. You cannot be so tied to just exploring opportunities of processing your own agricultural output. You'll have to get into industries that depend on inputs that you may not be producing and value chains that may not be here. You participate relatively less than others in value chains, in part because you are more protectionist than others. And you have not been able to make some of your production competitive with the way modern production is being organized in value chains. So I think that I'll let other experts to figure out what can be done in agricultural and fisheries, but I think you need other independent engines of growth, of urban growth, if you're going to achieve 8% growth.
Silahkan. Silahkan Pak Ibnu.
Thank you, Professor, for your insightful and eye-opening lecture. My name is Ibnu from Macro Planning Directorate. One of key takeaway is Indonesia has diversity and complexity, but not ubiquity. Meaning we have potential to grow more, but we have problem in utilizing our diverse know-how. So we get the idea that Bappenas is the key, since Bappenas has the authority to orchestrate this diversity of know-how. Bappenas has to give direction to efficient diversifications, since state budget resource is limited. What suggestions you can give to Bappenas to do this? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for connecting the lecture to Bappenas. I think it's a great insight. I think it would be very useful if Bappenas helps provinces figure out a diversification strategy for each province. I think it would be useful for you to create mechanisms to identify the constraints faced by industries that don't yet exist. So, you know, when an industry exists, it can complain. It can come knocking at your door to say, you know, fix this, fix that, this is not working, right? If an industry does not exist, it does not complain. But there might be things you're doing or not doing that is preventing that industry to exist. But since they don't exist, they don't complain, then they don't talk to you. So you need to figure out how to engage with that, we call it the extensive margin, these things that are on the edge of diversification, things that are not yet here, but could be here. And so the way I've seen it work in other places is you have institutions that because of their daily work, they connect to that space of possibilities. For example, there might be investment promotion agencies. And these investment promotion agencies, they talk to investors that are thinking of coming. And then in the process of the conversation, the investor looks, analyzes, and maybe at the end they decide not to come. You want to know why they did not come and what you could have fixed to make them come. Oftentimes, these agencies are too junior relative to the ministers in the cabinet, and the information doesn't get to them. But I would use these institutions as like intelligence agencies, economic intelligence agencies, to tell the government what are the opportunities people are thinking about, what are the obstacles that they are finding, what are the chicken and egg problems that are there, to see if you can help solve them. And the kinds of institutions that play that role are, on the one hand, investment promotion agencies. Number two, some kind of development banks. Suppose you have a development bank or a wing of the development bank focused on pioneer investors, people who want to do new things. If that development bank is, invests in pioneers, then pioneers will come to the development bank with business plans, with ideas, and so on. So that development bank will have information about what people are thinking about, what problems they're facing, what obstacles they're facing. That information would be super useful for the process of diversification. Third one is special economic zones. Special economic zones are often just real estate with some set of rules, and they need investors to come in and use the zone. They're very useful in finding out who's thinking about coming, why are they coming, not coming, what can we do to make them come, etc. These are very important sources of information about the space of possibilities and the space of obstacles. Most countries don't use them in that way, but some countries have used them remarkably well in that base. For example, the Dominican Republic uses their special economic zones remarkably for their diversification process, and they are a star in diversification. They don't have a big market, there are only 10 million people. They don't have raw materials, but it went from garments to electronics, and now there are medical devices and medical equipment and so on. So they've moved quite a bit, but because they have this mechanism of finding out what next we could be attracting and what do they need and so on. They often need your ability to provide labor training, not for the activities of yesterday, but for the activities of tomorrow. So you need to create mechanisms in your labor training and your formation that is more sensitive to changing demands. If you're diversifying, you're changing the kind of skills that the economy will want, and you have to have the capacity to change. Many countries subsidize training on the supply side. So they create institutions that provide the training that they know how to provide, and if that's not what the economy wants, that's the only thing that they can teach. That's what they know how to teach. And they are not able to accompany the needs for diversification. So that's another area where I think responsiveness is important.
Thank you, Professor Hausman. Kami silahkan Bapak terlebih dahulu, Ibu. Silahkan Bapak. Mikrofonnya. Nanti setelah itu baru Ibu Tari, baru Mbak ya.
I'm not sure how you're Indonesian, but selamat pagi, Professor. I'm enjoying your lecture, and I am very interested in your Scrabble theory, but my English words is very limited, so I'm not dive into it. But what I want to discuss, as you know that we are now creating or will be providing the so-called adaptive social protection. Continuing with the discussion, I just want to know the industrial policy that we were supposed to have, how this industrial policy will be affecting the the diversity, especially the inequality that we have spread in Indonesia among the Indonesia Timur, Western Indonesia or Eastern Indonesia, among Java and non-Java, or even the social economic status. Is there any impact inherently, not through the social adaptive social assistance, in the industrial policy? Because as you know that our president wants to have 8% growth, which must be inclusive and sustainable. Thank you, sir. But I have to say that I'm enjoying your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are some parts of Indonesia that are richer and other parts that are poorer. The reason why some parts are richer than others is because they have more know-how, they have more technology. So the inequality that you are observing is inequality in productivity. And that inequality in productivity is inequality in technology, the inequality in know-how. So you have two strategies. You can either cure the problem or you can compensate for the problem. If you want to cure the problem, you have to address the low productivity in poor areas. They have too few letters. They make very short words, very few short words. If you want them to become richer, they'll need to acquire more letters and express them in more words and in longer words. That is going to cure the problem. If you just send them a check, that may not increase their letters. That will trap them in low productivity with a check. That's going to be palliative. It's not going to be curative. Now, there are some things that are both curative and palliative. You have a stunting problem. Stunting is a symptom of malnutrition. Malnutrition is correlated with cognitive capacity. If you organize yourselves to make sure that the kids are well fed and that there is no malnutrition, when they grow up, they will have more capabilities and be able to do more. So I think that that is curative. That's good, okay? And I like that part of the agenda, to make sure that malnutrition disappears in the country. But I do believe that a diversification strategy that is adapted to every region of the country is necessary for all of them to participate in growth. If you don't solve the problem that they don't have the letters, see, one of the reasons why Jakarta is so crowded is because letters want to be where other letters are, so that they can combine themselves to make longer words, right? And that's why everybody wants to be in Jakarta, and that's why everybody subjects themselves to this horrible traffic in Jakarta, because they want to connect to other letters to make words, okay? That tells you how much is the attraction of this. So there is going to be a force that's going to want to concentrate activity, because letters want to be together. And as they concentrate, there are fewer letters left behind where they came from, okay? So if you want to have growth to be inclusive, you really want to think about strategies for every region of the country. So I would redo the analysis of these monkeys and trees, this product space analysis. I would do it for every locality to find opportunities for diversification. In essence, a country grows at 8% not because it does more of the same. A country grows at 8% because it starts doing different things, more complicated things. You're not going to grow at 8% by making more of the same. And to do more things, more complicated things, you'll have to solve these chicken and egg problems. See, because what's a chicken and egg problem? You cannot make watches without watchmakers. But how do you become a watchmaker in a country that doesn't make watches? But if nobody becomes a watchmaker, how are you going to make watches? So there is no demand for the letter unless you try to make the word. And you cannot make the word if the letter is there. Okay? That's the chicken and egg problem that this quote-unquote industrial policy is called to solve. And there are different ways of going about it. One way to make watches, if you don't have watchmakers, is to allow some watchmakers to come to the country. Right? So maybe those are immigration individuals, or maybe it's foreign direct investment. They know how to make watches somewhere else. They try to make watches here. They bring some workers, they train other workers, and that's one way to make watches. Another way that we have been using in other countries is to exploit your diaspora. Your diaspora is in other countries, exposed to other technologies, to other industries that may not be here. They know Indonesia, they know other things, they can arbitrage. So we have found that diasporas have had a very important role to play in diversification. In countries from Ethiopia to Sri Lanka to Colombia to Albania, we have worked on diaspora strategies for diversification. And I think that's another angle to the problem. I find it interesting that relative to your neighbors, there's less foreign direct investment here. And I don't know to what extent you have been leveraging your diaspora for diversification. So I just leave it as avenues for progress.
Selanjutnya kami silakan kepada Ibu Tari.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Professor. It's really nice to hear your lecture and also discussion. My name is Tari. I'm a director for State Budget and Monetary Analysis. I'm wondering to hear your experiences when you assisted any other countries that has been successfully to increase their economic complexity. What kind of fiscal and monetary policy that they running? For example, is there any specific role of central bank to promote economic diversification? And do you see that giving the fiscal incentive to create more complexity still needed for Indonesia, for example, and from the successful country that promoting diversification more, is there still giving by the government about incentive? And you mentioned also earlier about the subsidy for the training. So at the beginning, what should the government do to intervene to promote diversification efficiently? Thank you so much, Professor.
Okay, so the first thing that you can do, and that Indonesia has done, and chapeau, bravo, is you want to remain investment grade. You want to manage a good fiscal, prudent fiscal stance, a good monetary policy, so real interest rates can be as low as possible, so the banking system can be as stable as possible, so that finance can be as accessible as possible. And so you want to be responsibly managing the macro. Second, having been a minister once before, I am very stingy with money. I would rather deregulate than subsidize. And there's many things in which you are making through regulation investment less attractive. So instead of regulating and restricting and then giving them money, either don't regulate and don't restrict, wait for the money. Third, I do find good reasons to tax exportable activities or exports less significantly than domestic activity. We already do it with a value-added tax, right? So value-added tax is a tax on consumption, but not a tax on export. So if you export, you get your VAT back, right? So I think that logic, I'm more amenable to have, say, less stringent taxes, income taxes, corporate taxes on export-oriented activities. And my logic is the following. If you put a tax on haircuts, people will have to pay the tax because, you know, haircuts are non-tradable because on current technology, your head has to be sufficiently close to the scissors for them to cut your hair, right? Cannot import the haircut, right? So if you tax that activity, it will be a tax on all the producers of that activity. If you tax exports, the customer of those exports does not have to buy from Indonesia. So if you tax the export and somebody else doesn't tax their export, you will lose the market. So I'm going to talk economic theory. Optimal taxes are supposed to be a function of how elastic is the tax base to the tax rate. The more sensitive is the tax base to the tax rate, the lower the tax you want to impose. I'm saying that exports have a more elastic tax base, so you would like to have a lower tax rate. So I'm willing to consider that export-oriented activities might benefit from a lower tax rate than domestic-oriented activities, okay? With the same logic of why you tax VAT on local consumption and not on exports. So, but I think that the policies that I would favor are cheap. They should not be a big part of the budget. It's more important, for example, if you want to attract investment, to commit to provide the infrastructure, the connectivity, the transport, right, the quality electricity, than to give them money. I would invest the money in making the ecosystem better, not necessarily in giving the money to the investor. I want to make them more productive, not necessarily more profitable. I want them to become more productive because they're more, I want to make them more profitable because they're more productive. I don't want to make them more profitable because I subsidize them. Okay? So my interventions would be productivity enhancing, not just stimulate. Okay? If my ecosystem is making them unproductive, I would rather put my money in fixing the ecosystem than in compensating them for their low productivity.
Thank you, Professor. Satu pertanyaan lagi, satu pertanyaan terakhir, disilahkan.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your insightful lecture. I'm Desi from Directorate of Trade, Investment, and International Economic Cooperation. I have two questions. The first one is, Indonesia government is playing increasingly active role in directing the economy, and also Indonesia has recently implemented quite many protectionist policy. While this is meant to boost domestic industry, your research on economic complexity suggests that growth comes from expanding productive capabilities. My question are, what is the optimal balance between the state-led economic planning and the free market dynamism? Where should the government intervene and where should it step back? How do we balance the short-term protectionism with the long-term complexity growth, especially when global supply chains are increasingly fragmented due to geopolitics? Maybe you also can relate with the recent development of geopolitics after President Trump. And the second question is, many of Indonesia growth bottlenecks are politically difficult to reform. What strategies have worked in other countries to push through difficult but necessary reforms? Thank you so much, Professor.
No, thank you for your question. First of all, I think that I don't like this frame of state-led versus market. I don't think of the state as a substitute of the market. I think of the state as a complement of the market. Substitutes are things like coffee and tea. Complements are things like coffee and sugar. So the more coffee you have, the more sugar you want. The more coffee you have, the less tea you want. So I think that the more market needs more state, more capable state. It's not so, but it implies a state that plays a different role. If you want to think of a metaphor, in this world of Scrabble, there are two kinds of letters. There are some letters that you can go out in the market and buy them. Okay, call them private goods. There are some letters that are public goods. There are no market for them. Either the government provides them or they don't exist. So for example, there's a market for cars. And you can go to the market and buy a car. There is no market for roads, no market for traffic lights, no market for traffic signs, no market for traffic rules, no market for traffic cops. If you want to have an efficient car industry and so on, you have to convince people that they will be able to use their car in the roads and that it will be relatively safe to travel and so on. So you see that the public goods provided by the government are fundamental to the development of the market for cars. Right now, for example, you want to develop the market for EVs, but people are unsure whether they will be able to charge their car wherever they run out of juice, out of energy. So you want to make sure that people have that trust that they will be able to charge their cars, otherwise the market does not develop. This is an example of this complementarity between the things that the government needs to provide for the market to develop. So the way I think of it is public goods are like vowels and private goods are like consonants. And in most words, you mix vowels with consonants. So all the words, all the products have some combination of public goods and private goods. The government has to organize itself to provide the public goods. Now, in the process of learning how to make a new industry, how to make sure that the watchmaker is there to make watches and that the watch industry is there to hire the watchmaker and so on, you may need some time for people to learn. In the past, the idea was that we provide them time to learn through protection. But I think that protection ends up creating not only the incentive to learn, but the desire to only focus on the domestic market at higher costs that are permitted by protection. So I think there are other ways to intervene in the market, not through protection, to make these industries viable. So I would rebalance the quote-unquote industrial policy, if you want, to make it more neutral vis-a-vis exports. So for example, a lot of the industries that developed very, very quickly in Vietnam, in China, even in Thailand, did not start by import substitution. They started from the beginning with the idea that they would be part of global value chains for export that would also sell domestically. I think that this idea of using a first step of domestic protectionism sometimes leads you to a dead-end street. And not an infant industry, but an old midget. So I think that you should not give up with your desire to promote diversification, but we can have a discussion of what are the right instruments to do it. I think I answered the first question, but I forgot the second question. Yeah, hard to do reforms. Well, if a reform promises to unleash growth and unleash income in the future, there has to be a coalition that sees that future, that wants to push for that reform. So this in principle should be a win-win strategy. Sometimes you have incumbents who might see themselves as their position being threatened by the fact that, for example, I remember I had a big fight in Latin America when mobile banking was developed, that traditional banks thought that it was a threat, and they wanted to use regulation to prevent them. Right, so digital banking and so on, they saw that as a threat. And they wanted to use know your customer regulations and anti-money laundering regulations and so on to prevent these new banks from coming in. In the end, I think that what ended up happening is that the incumbents bank had to adopt mobile banking and all these other things and adapt their technologies. But I think they did slow down the transformation. So, and sometimes, you know, these incumbents are state-owned enterprises that see themselves under threat from potential entrants. And sometimes you even create some things that look like state-owned enterprises when you could have looked at other things. For example, I find it fantastic. I've learned about Gojek and other companies of that kind that are able to mobilize the letters that are there to solve problems that were not solved before. And what I find interesting about Gojek is that they found many more markets than Uber, right? They were able to transform more industries than Uber because it had more applications. I would like to see the government use those instruments more. For example, if you want to distribute school lunches, could you use more of that capacity that's decentralized out there, or do you want to do central kitchens that are run by the state and coordinated by the state? Are there other ways, more different ways to involve society in solving its problems? And I wonder if I were to think of a school lunch program from scratch, how much I would leverage technology and society to deliver on those goods, and maybe even use that technology to assure quality, you know, because on these mobile things, people vote and give, comments and criticize and so on, and it makes them more concerned about maintaining their reputation and so on. So we're having ways of solving problems that we may not be leveraging because we're using the state more than the market.
Thank you, Professor. Dan satu pertanyaan lagi karena waktu kita yang terbatas, kami silahkan Bu Laksmi.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much, Professor Horstman, for a very interesting presentation and social lectures today. I just want to highlight here that you mentioned about the diversity, complexity, collective knowledge. We know that Indonesian economy cannot avoid the external factors. So in the current situations, we are facing high uncertainty in the global economy and also higher tension of geopolitics, the inward-looking policy of Trump and slowing down of China economic growth. So we understand those global uncertainty as a challenge for us, but how we can see those global uncertainty as an opportunity for the Indonesian economy, so we can still achieve 8% growth target in 2029, and how it can be related to the collective knowledge, diversity, and complexity. Thank you.
So, I mean, there is one of the things of the geopolitical confrontation is that many countries in the West are concerned with reliance on China, right? And they call that de-risking China, decoupling, de-risking from China. So China has a very large market share in many industries. And the world would like to be able to buy from other places. If you look at the US imports, the market share from China has been falling, but the market share from Vietnam, Cambodia, Mexico, Dominican Republic, and so on have been going up. So I see that as an opportunity. For example, an inordinate amount of mineral processing happens in China. I do not know why. I know that, for example, Peru and Chile export to China copper concentrates at 30% copper. That means that they are exporting 70% garbage, all the way from Chile and Peru to China. They don't find it profitable to process it in Chile or Peru. They let China do it. But now the world is concerned that they don't want to rely on China having that big a hold in mineral processing. So is that an opportunity for other countries that want to do mineral processing? And the world will buy from you because they want to diversify the China risk? Is that an opportunity? So I would think about that. I think the problem with President Trump is that we don't know what he wants to do, because I think he doesn't know what he wants to do. So one day he decides to put tariffs on Mexico and Canada. The next day he changes his mind. So I think he just doesn't know what he wants to do, and we all have to live with this uncertainty of having a president that doesn't think straight. And so, but my guess is that there will be enough pressure on the US government not to do too many crazy things, because when you do crazy things, the stock market falls, and then everybody thinks that you need to stop. And that's a little bit what happened with the tariffs on Canada and Mexico, that he announced the tariffs and the stock market fell, and then, you know, they realized that it was going to have very bad effects, and they stopped. So I hope that I'm not putting any trust on the wisdom of President Trump. I'm putting a little bit of trust on the checks and balances and on the market discipline that surrounds him. And I will try to see how I can use the geopolitics to my advantage by, you know, looking at places where the people would be willing to, that the geopolitics makes them more likely to buy from me.
Thank you, Professor Hausman. Sudah cukup ya, Bu Laksmi, untuk dijawab oleh Profesor Hausman. There was a very engaging discussion. Thank you to all the participants for your thoughtful questions and contribution. Thank you so much, Professor Hausman. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give a very big round of applause for Professor Hausman. You may return to your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, our honorable guests, now we are here. Closing remarks by Deputy Minister for Macro Planning and Development to Mr. Eka Chandra Buana. The floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, Your Excellency, Professor Ricardo Hausman, distinguished guests, colleagues, and esteemed participants. As we conclude today's public lecture, we would like to extend my deepest appreciation to Professor Hausman for sharing his valuable insight with us. We are grateful for the opportunity to learn from your expertise. We have explored a new perspective, fresh approach, and strategies to achieve high economic growth. We have revisited the finding of Indonesian stagnant position on complexity of the economy become a key obstacles to fostering the economic expansion and accelerate sustainable growth. We, as a planners, think this discussion have been highly valuable in sharpening our understanding and broadening our perspective on how to achieve of high and inclusive economic growth. Your insight, Professor Hausman, have enforced the importance of innovation and technology strategies, the tactical strategies to devise the economy, and the possibility of green growth to navigate the evolving our economic landscape. However, as we have learned today, with the comprehensive stock-taking issues, we have deep dive into final conclusion with the right know-how diagnostic on opportunities ahead. We can shaping the right policy mix and strategic planning so Indonesia can remain on the path to achieving strong and sustainable growth. Once again, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for Professor Hausman for his time, for your time and expertise, and to all the participants who have actively engaged in today's discussion. Your contribution are valuable in helping us refine our development strategies for the years ahead. Thank you for all your participation. I wish you continue success in your respective endeavor and looking forward future collaboration in our mission of advancing Indonesia economic development. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Pak Chandra. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's public lecture. We sincerely appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you in our future discussion. Thank you and have a great day.